Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us for our Motzei Shabbos HaGadol Zoom Drasha. I'm going to begin by thanking all of our sponsors of tonight's Schrier. Tonight's Schrier is co-sponsored by Talia and Danny Ackerman in memory of Danny's father, Jeffrey Ackerman Baruchman Alexander, whose third yahrzeit is Yud Nisan, by Nechama and Ari Ekman in memory of Ari's father, Lester Ekman, Eliezer Shmuel ben Aryeh Leib, Olav Shalom, on his fifth yahrzeit, which will be on the seventh day of Pesach, Chav Aleph Nisan. By Marsha and Mel Ness in memory of Mel's father, Louis Ness, Aryeh Leib ben Yaakov, whose 57th yahrzeit is the 20th of Nisan, and Mel's grandmother, Chana Ness, Chana Bas Aryeh Leib, whose 70th yahrzeit is the 16th of Nisan. By Susan and David Rosenbaum in memory of Adel Bas Yoshua, Adele Rosenbaum, David's mother, on her 42nd yahrzeit, which will be on our Pesach, and for the speedy return of all our hostages, may Avdos Lacheros. And by Lisa and Ari Sugarman and family in memory of Alan Sugarman, Avram Shmuel ben Yehuda Aryeh Alav Shalom, whose yahrzeit is the 18th of Nisan. May the souls of the departed have an aliyas neshama, and may our hostages indeed return. May Avdos Lacheros, may Afela Lioro Mishibu Likaula, Hashta Ba'agala Ubizman Karev. Again, I thank you all for joining us for this Motzei Shabbos HaGadol Drasha. I hope everyone has access to the Marim Komos, which were posted on the website. And we will begin, of course, with our very first source number 1. Now, before we jump into that source, a bit of background on what we're going to explore tonight. Tonight, we are going to together explore a topic that is at once a road well traveled, it's well-trodden earth. It's a topic that has received much attention and study, focus, analysis from our Gedolei Achronim. It's a topic that's discussed frequently, that has been written about extensively, on the one hand. And at the same time, on the other hand, we're going to explore a subtopic within that broader discourse that is fertile ground, as far as I can tell, practically untouched earth that has not garnered much attention amidst all of the broader questions swirling within the larger topic and the broader discourse. And the topic that we're going to focus on is the relationship between Sipor Yetzias Mitzrayim and Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, particularly within the worldview and the writings of the Rambam. Now, again, as general background, as a means of introduction, we have 2 mitzvot in the Torah that command us to relate the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We have many additional mitzvot that are thematically related to Yetzias Mitzrayim in some way or another. We'll explore that later tonight. But 2 mitzvot that pretty directly tell us, relate the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. One is what we call Sipur. That's the mitzvah that we're all going to do a week from tonight when we sit around the Seder table with matzah, with maror, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, with the Karban Pesach as well. And we delve deep into all the glorious detail of the story of Shibud Mitzrayim, our servitude and bondage in Egypt, and ultimately Yetzias Mitzrayim, ultimately our exodus from Egypt. That's the mitzvah of Sipur. And then there is a second mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, a mitzvah to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, not just on the 15th of Nisan, not just on the night of the Seder, but really every day of the year, and as we record in our HaGadol, every night of the year as well. 2 mitzvos, Sipur and Zechira. Now, as I said a moment ago, there are many broad questions pertaining to the relationship between these 2 mitzvos. How are they similar? How are they different? What are the halachic nuances of each one? There are broad questions in the Rambam. Why does the Rambam only count one of the 2 mitzvos in his Minyan Taryag, in his Sefer HaMitzvos? In Rambam's count of the 613, he counts the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, as we will explore in just a moment, but he never mentions Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, and some wonder why exactly the Rambam leaves one out. Those questions receive a lot of attention, but our question for tonight is going to more narrowly focus on psukim, the psukim in the Torah that serve as the source texts for these 2 mitzvos. If you look in section number 1, what I labeled Torah Shabbat, sources 1 through 4, I present you with 4 psukim. Tonight, I offer you not 4 questions, not 4 cups of wine, 4 sons, but 4 biblical verses, 4 psukim in the Torah HaKadosha that describe these mitzvos. The first 2 describing the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the next 2 describing the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Let's take a look at what the psukim say, and we will see how they are employed in the Torah Shebaal Peh and in the writings of the Rambam. Source number 1 is a pasuk from the beginning of Parshas Bo. The seventh Makkah, Makkah's Baran, has just been completed. The hail has fallen on Mitzrayim. Makkah's Arba, the eighth Makkah, has not yet begun. Hashem tells Moshe to approach Paro, to tell him once again to let the Jewish people go. He forewarns Moshe. Paro is not going to do so. I have hardened his heart. And why have I hardened his heart? In order to increase the signs that I'm performing in Mitzrayim. And then Pasuk Beis in bold, Ulema'an tesaper be'oznei bincha uven bincha, eis asher his alalti b'Mitzrayim be'es ososai asher samtivam b'idatem ki ani Hashem. And in order, again, just the bold words, Ulema'an tesaper be'oznei bincha uven bincha, in order to tell your children and their children after them about all that transpired in Mitzrayim, about all the signs and wonders that I have performed here, and through them you will know that I am Hashem. The whole language of Sipur, Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, comes from this pasuk, Ulema'an tisaper be'oznei bincha uven bincha, and so this pasuk is certainly related to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now that being said, as much as linguistically this is the source for the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, we will see that this first pasuk actually does not get much play in the halachic sources pertaining to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's quite simply because the pasuk is not shared in a halachic context. There's no command, there's no tzivoy. It's in the context of the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Moshe's continued dialogues with Paro. In that context, the Torah says the story should be told to children and their children after them. But if you want a more halachic source for the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, it appears in source number 2, in Shemos Perek Yud Gimel Pasuk Ches. There, the Torah tells us, in another critical word on the night of the Seder, V'higadata levincha bayom hahu lemor, pa'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim. And you shall tell your children on that day. What is that day? As we will see, that day refers to the 15th of Nisan, the night of the Seder. Pa'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim. You should tell them that Hashem did all of these things for us when we left Egypt. Now that word V'higadata, I said a moment ago, is also critical for the night of the Seder, because from that word we derive the word HaGadol. Our text that serves as the central text of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is called the HaGadol, based on this pasuk, V'higadata levincha. And because this pasuk is phrased as a kind of tzivoy, it does appear to be a halachic pasuk. This, as we will see, serves in most sources as the central pasuk, the central source text for the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. So we have Shmos Perek Yud and Shmos Perek Yud Gimel. They tell us about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. What about Zechira? Schrier appears in its own 2 psukim. Source number 3 is actually a bit of a misprint. It's one that I only noted after our sources went to print. It's a pasuk that's actually rather critical for our discussion tonight, something that we'll return to at the very end of tonight's Drasha. But source number 3 should not say B'midbar of Perek Tezvav. It really should say Devarim Perek Tezayin. Pasuk that says, L'ma'an tizkor es yom tzezecha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. We'll see that pasuk quoted in source number 5 in just a moment. But it's a pasuk that tells us you should remember Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha, every day of your life, as we famously expounded the Haggadah, yemei chayecha, hayamim kol yemei chayecha, leilos, day and night, every day, not just the 15th of Nisan. You should always remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's one pasuk that tells us about Zechira. And then we come to source number 4. In Shemos Perek Yud Gimel Pasuk Gimel, we have a pasuk that I would suggest to you is not nearly as well known as the 3 psukim that we cited and referenced to this point. But we have another pasuk that will be the most important pasuk for us this evening. In source number 4, we read, Vayomer Moshe el ha'am, Moshe tells the people, Zachor es hayom hazeh, asher yitzasem mi Mitzrayim mi beis havadim, ki b'chol zek yarosi Hashem aschem mizev lo yechal chametz. Zachor es hayom hazeh, remember this day that we left Mitzrayim, that we left bondage and servitude. For with a mighty hand Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, we shouldn't consume chametz. We once again have this language of zechira, of remembrance. And Rashi on the pasuk once again says, this refers to the daily mitzvah to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. So 2 psukim for Sipur and 2 psukim for zechira. When we turn from the Torah Shebachsav to the Torah Sheba'al-Peh, we find these mitzvos enshrined in rather famous sources in Chazal. Famous because we quote them in the Haggadah itself. If you want the Torah Sheba'al-Peh source for the mitzvah of Sipur, in source number 5, you will find a Mishnah in the first paragraph of Sefas Brachos that declares, Maskirin Yetzias Mitzrayim Baleilos. We mention Yetzias Mitzrayim at night. Not just one night, every night we mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why? We have a whole story with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Hare ani kiv ben shivim shana. I'm like 70 years old. He was 18. He grew a beard overnight. He quotes a drasha of Ben Zoma for our purposes. What does the drasha say? Second bold line of source number 5. Shenamar lema'an tizkor as yom tzeisachah me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yimei chayecha. Again, the pasuk from Devarim Parak Tesayin. You should remember Yetzias Mitzrayim all the days of your life. Yimei chayecha yamim kol yimei chayecha leilos, as we alluded to a moment ago. Every night, every day, you should remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's the source for Zechirut. What is the source for Sipur? The Mechilta in source number 6 is also quoted, if not directly, it's certainly alluded to in our HaGadol. The Higadata Levincha, that pasuk that tells you should teach it to your children, says the Medrash, Shomei ani merosh chodesh, or as we say in the Haggadah, Yachol merosh chodesh. Maybe you should tell them a story on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Talmud Lomer bayomahu, Ibayomahu Yachol mi ba'od yom. Maybe you should tell them during the daytime, not in the evening, not on the night of the Seder. Talmud Lomer ba'avur zeh, and then in bold, B'shah sheyesh matzah umarur munachim lefanacha al shulchancha. At the time that you have matzah and maror, that is the time to tell the story. That's the time of the Higadata Levincha to relate the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So that is the mitzvah of Sipur, again, both enshrined in famous sources that are recorded in the HaGadol itself. But then we turn to source number 7, which is another medrash, the Mechilta de Rashbi, which, like we saw before with source number 4, is not as famous as the sources that preceded it. This one does not appear in the Haggadah. But once again, for us tonight, this will be the most important of our sources in Torah Sheba'al Peh that tells us about this mitzvah. I will read the medrash in its entirety, the entire source number 7, and afterwards I'll translate and unpack its content. Source number 7. Vayomer Moshe el ha'am zachor es hayom hazeh. Moshe tells the people, remember this day. Miklal shene'emer v'haya ki yish'alcha bancha machar lemor. Yachol im yish'alcha ata magidlo ve'im lav iyata magidlo. Talmud lomar v'higadata levincha. Afal pisha eino shalcha. Ein li ela bezman sheyesh lo ben. Beino levein atzmo, beino levein acherim minayin. Talmud lomar vayoma Moshe el ha'am zachor es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem mitzrayim. The Mechilta here, the Mechilta Drashbi, considers 3 different scenarios of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim and uses psukim to teach me about each one. First, the Mechilta considers the possibility that Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim only and exclusively applies in a scenario where our children ask us about the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. There are many psukim that make reference to children asking questions. That serves as the basis for the archetype of the 4 sons of the Arba Banim. So maybe the Medrash considers, the Hava Amina considers the possibility, perhaps you would only be obligated in this mitzvah when your children ask you about Yetzias Mitzrayim. But if they don't ask any questions, if they don't ask Manashtana Halayla Hazem Mikol Halaylos, then perhaps there is no obligation to tell the story. The Medrash says, Talmud Lomar v'higadata levincha, the pasuk of v'higadata levincha, you shall tell your children, instructs us that we should offer proactive instruction. Even if they don't ask the question, we should teach them nonetheless. That's scenario number 2. If your children are present, even if they don't ask, teach them the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Then the Medrash says, maybe you only have a mitzvah if there are children to teach. What about scenario number 3? What about a scenario where there are no children around your Seder table, where you're just sitting with contemporaries, with colleagues? What if you're just sitting by yourself? Maybe then, if the only source is v'higadata levincha, the only source is telling you to instruct your children, and perhaps then there's no obligation of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Medrash says that that last pasuk, source number 4, Vayomer Moshe el ha'am zachor es hayom hazeh, that teaches us that there is an obligation no matter what. No matter who you're sitting with, no matter their ages, no matter their level of Torah scholarship, as the Haggadah tells us, even if we are all chachamim unevonim, even if we all know the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim backwards and forwards, we are obligated to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim on the 15th of Nisan, on the night of the Seder. That is the Mechilta de Rashbi. Those are the sources in Torah Sheba'al Peh. We now turn to the writings of the Rambam that appear in sources number 8 and 9. And in doing so, we'll read 2 passages from the Rambam, one from his Sefer HaMitzvos, where the Rambam collects and enumerates the 613 mitzvos in the Torah, giving us a basic description of each one, and a second from the Mishnah Torah, the Yad HaChazaka, the Rambam's magnum opus, where he codifies the entirety of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And as we read these sources, I ask you to focus on the psukim that the Rambam quotes. Of course, I made it somewhat easy to do so if you're following the source sheets, the Marmakomos. because I put the psukim in bold, and we will focus on those bold lines for the sake of brevity in order to preserve time. But pay attention to those psukim, see how the Rambam utilizes them, and take note of any discrepancies that may exist between the Rambam in these two sources. In source number 8, the Rambam tells us as follows. The mitzvah hakuf nun zayin, the 157th mitzvah, Ki shetzivanu l'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim, b'leil chamisha asar b'nisan. It is the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, to tell the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim on the 15th of Nisan. And the Rambam goes on to say that that the more you invest in the story, in the details of the story, and different components of the story, it is considered praiseworthy. And then in the second bold line of source number 8, the Rambam tells us, what is the source text for this mitzvah? What is the pasuk that tells us that we have such a command? Hu omro yisparach v'higadata levincha bayom hahu. The pasuk that teaches us about this command is v'higadata levincha, the pasuk that we would expect, the pasuk, and initially served as the source in the Medrash, in the Mechilta to Rabbi Shmuel, and the Mechilta to Rashbi. In the second paragraph, the Rambam goes on to quote the continuation of the Medrash. He does note that if you just had that pasuk, maybe you'd think that you only have an obligation when you're teaching your children. How do you know that you have to engage in that discourse, even if it's just a Seder of adults? And then the final bold line of source number 8, Pasuk tells us, you should remember this day. Like the Medrash, the Rambam says, that informs you of an obligation even in the absence of children. So if you just look at the Sefer HaMitzvot of the Rambam, the source for the mitzvah is V'gav Levincha. Zachar es hayom hazeh expands the scope to scenarios where there are no children to teach. That was all the Rambam said. We'd be able to fold up right here. The Rambam engages in a faithful quotation of the Medrash. There's nothing too exciting or noteworthy in the Rambam thus far. The problems begin when we turn to the Rambam in Mishnah Torah. Source number 9. Rambam Chametz U'Matzah Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph, which reads as follows: Mitzvahs Aseh Shel Torah. L'saper b'nisim v'neflo shenasu la'avoseinu b'Mitzrayim b'leil chamisha asar b'nisan. There's a mitzvah called Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, to tell the story of what happened to our forefathers in Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, thousands of years ago. And then the Rambam says, Shene Emar. And there's a pasuk that teaches you this mitzvah. Now, as faithful students of the Rambam, who just learned source number 8, who just learned the Rambam's description of this mitzvah in Sefer HaMitzvot, we know exactly what the Rambam surely must quote. We know that he will say, Shene Emar, V'gadata levincha bayom hahu leimor, as he just told us in Mitzvah Saseh Kuf Nun Zayin. When you look at what the Rambam actually writes in Mishnah Torah, source number 9, first bold line, Rambam throws us a curveball. He quotes a different pasuk. Shene Emar, Zachor es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem miMitzrayim. Rambam says the source for the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is Zachor es hayom hazeh, the pasuk we have referred to as source number 4. Rambam continues, K'moshe ne'emar Zachor es yom haShabbos. Rambam compares it to the mitzvah of remembering Shabbos. Note that line did not appear in the Medrash. It's the Rambam's own chiddush to compare it to Zachor es yom haShabbos. It's something that he records in Sefer HaMitzvot as well in the second paragraph, but it's his own, again, extenuation of this pasuk and of this line in the Medrash. And then the Rambam continues, Uminayin shebeleil chamisha asar. How do I know that this mitzvah is to be performed on the 15th? How do I know that one detail regarding the timing of this mitzvah, when it should be performed? Tamulomar v'gad levincha bayom hahu leimor ba'avur zeh v'shah sheyesh matzah u'maror munachim lefanecha. The Rambam says, you want to know what the pasuk of V'higadata is good for? That pasuk tells you when you should do the mitzvah. It tells you that it should be on the night of the 15th of Nisan. That is the purpose of V'higadata levincha. And the Rambam concludes, Rambam indeed concludes that even if you don't have children, everyone should engage in this mitzvah. Afilu chachamim gedolim should speak about the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim at length. So when you look at these two sources, there are evident discrepancies between them. And source number 9, the Rambam in Mishnah Torah in particular, raises many questions. First of all, why is the Rambam abandoning the pasuk of HaGadol levincha, which seems to be the standard source in Torah Sheba'al Peh for the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? Why does he suddenly ditch that pasuk and instead adopt the pasuk of Zachor es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem miMitzrayim? Question one. And more significantly, if you're going to do so, if you're going to ditch the pasuk of HaGadol levincha, if you're instead going to enshrine and adopt Zachor es hayom hazeh, at least do so consistently. If you're going to do so, do it in the Sefer HaMitzvos as well. Why do you only do so in Mishnah Torah, creating this internal discrepancy, this internal inconsistency within your own writings? What are we to make of the stira b'divrei HaRambam, of the internal contradiction regarding which pasuk is primary and which only teaches me details? That's the question that I want to explore tonight. Now, in classic rabbinic fashion, before I offer an approach or answer to the question, I'll instead start with adding more questions on top of it by making the issue worse before we make it better. And in this context, the truth is the follow-up questions that we will raise are really just extensions of the original question. If you encounter a discrepancy between the Rambam and Sefer HaMitzvos and Mishnah Torah in the context of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, one's natural next question should be, are there any other instances where we find similar discrepancy? Is this a unique phenomenon that only appears in the context of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? Or are there other examples that we can look to, perhaps patterns to be identified within the writings of the Rambam that can help us and share with us what the Rambam is trying to communicate when he has these differences in the psukim? So as I was contemplating this discrepancy in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, I was thinking about other cases that I know of where there is such a discrepancy. I did not have time in the weeks before Pesach to do a systematic study of all 613 mitzvos, I openly confess. But together with a dear colleague and friend of mine, Rabbi I was able to compile a list of 9 instances, 6 mitzvos aseh, 3 mitzvos losa aseh, where this discrepancy or similar discrepancies do exist. I assume that is not an exhaustive list. I would imagine that if you went through the Rambam systematically and all the 613, all the Torah mitzvos, you could probably find additional examples as well. But those are at least some examples where the Rambam does have a similar difference between Sefer HaMitzvos and Mishnah Torah. And we're not going to examine all 9 of them tonight. Perhaps on a future occasion we can do so. Before tonight, I want to take a look at least 2 other instances where this applies, 2 other mitzvos that also relate deeply to the themes of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that can perhaps shed light on our question about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, perhaps share with us what the Rambam is trying to communicate about the proper way to fulfill this mitzvah. Section 4 is a description of the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, the mitzvah to redeem a firstborn child. If you have a natural born firstborn child, neither parent is of Levitic origin, you engage in the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. On a deeply personal level, our family will, Ezra Hashem, be celebrating a Pidyon Haben this coming Tuesday night. My brother recently had a baby boy. My brother and sister-in-law had a baby boy. And it will be the first in our family. My wife Rina is a Bas Levi, so we did not make a Pidyon Haben. My brother in Eretz Yisrael, his oldest is my niece Yonina, so this will be our first Pidyon Haben in this generation, in the immediate family. And the Rambam describes this mitzvah in sources 10 through 13. In Sefer HaMitzvos, the Rambam says, the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, the mitzvah when you have this firstborn child to redeem him from the Kohen. What is the source for the mitzvah? We'll just stick to the bold of sources 10 through 12. Bechor banecha titen li. It is the pasuk that appears in Shmos Perach Beis pasuk Lachves that declares, "You shall give your firstborn child to Hashem." That's the source for Pidyon Haben. But you turn to Mishnah Torah, source 12, Rambam and Bikurim Parakit Aleph Halacha Aleph, and here the Rambam chooses a different pasuk. Gone is any reference to Shmos Perach Beis, and in its place we have Bamidbar Parakit Ches. Kol Peta Rechem Li. Hashem tells us, each firstborn belongs to me. But you shall surely redeem your firstborn child. In this case, the discrepancy is even more acute than what we saw in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. In our case, in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Rambam quoted the same psukim, but he changed which one was primary and which one was secondary, which one was the source of the mitzvah, and which one only taught us details. Here, the Rambam quotes entirely different psukim. B'chor banecha titen li in Sefer HaMitzvos, ach padot tifta es b'chor ha'adam in Mishnah Torah. If you turn to page 3, section 5 describes the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, which we read about last week in the Maftir in Parshas HaChodesh, the mitzvah for Beis Din, to declare Rosh Chodesh, to establish the Jewish calendar. In the Sefer HaMitzvot, source number 14, Mitzvah Sasei Kufnun Gimel, the Rambam says that the source for this mitzvah is HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. The psukim that come from the beginning of Shmos Perek Beis that indeed we read in last week's Maftir, the psukim for Parshas HaChodesh that declare Nisan will be the first of the month. Chodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim Rishon Hu Lachem Lechodshei HaShana. That is the source for this mitzvah. But in Mishnah Torah, source number 16, the Rambam once again abandons the pasuk that he quoted in Sefer HaMitzvos and quotes something else entirely. Vayikra perach of Gimel pasuk lamed zayin asher tikru'u osam nikrei kodesh ela moadei Hashem asher tikru'u osam nikrei kodesh v'ne'emar b'shamar Torah zachuga zos l'moadah b'yamim yamima pasuk in Shmos Perek Gimel. Gone is any reference to the pasuk we are familiar with from the beginning of Parshas HaChodesh. Now, I will say that in this instance, if you look at source number 19, the Rambam does quote HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, but really only to teach us a detail. He says that's what tells us that we follow a lunar calendar rather than a solar calendar. It doesn't seem at all to be the source of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. What is the source of that mitzvah? Asher tekru'u osam mikrei kodesh, v'shomer ta'as ha'chuka zos l'moadah. And in each of these instances, we are left wondering, what is the Rambam trying to communicate? What is he trying to teach us? Why the inconsistency? Why the discrepancy? Why the contradiction? What is the broader message here? Now, in trying to answer all of these questions, allow me to introduce and to employ a construct that is a very common construct in the world of brisker discourse, in the world of conceptual Torah learning, and one that Rosh Soloveitchik was rather fond of in the context of mitzvah description. And that is the difference between Maisa mitzvah and Kiyum HaMitzvah. The difference between the act of a mitzvah, the way in which a mitzvah is performed, and the Kiyum HaMitzvah, the broader thematic goals that the mitzvah seeks to achieve. In illustrating these two paradigms of Maisa and Kiyum HaMitzvah, allow me to employ the examples that were perhaps Rav Soloveitchik's favorite examples of this phenomenon. In a week, we will all observe the mitzvah of Simchas HaRegel. There's a mitzvah to rejoice on the Shalosh Regalim, on Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. And there's a very particular way, there's a formula for performing that Maisa of Simchas HaRegel. It was particularly structured in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Back in those times, you would bring a special karban, what was called Shalmei Simcha. You would partake of the karban, you would eat from the meat of the karban, and that was your fulfillment of the mitzvah of Simchas HaRegel. Nowadays, we have a festive meal. We try to do, again, other formal maisim, other formal actions in order to be yotzei that mitzvah, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of rejoicing on the holidays. But says Rav Soloveitchik, if you just go through the motions, if you just perform the acts, but you don't actually tap into the festive atmosphere of the Yomim Tovim, you don't tap into the rejoicing and the thematic festivity of the various Yomim Tovim, then you haven't actually fulfilled the mitzvah. Yes, there is a narrow Maisa HaMitzvah. Bring that karban, eat its meat in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. That is the act that you are supposed to do. But of course, that act is a means toward a larger end. The end is to rejoice, to be festive, to feel the festive spirit and atmosphere of our Yom Tovim. On the polar opposite end of the emotional spectrum, Soloveitchik suggested the same thing regarding the mitzvah of Avelos. In the context of Avelos, we have a mitzvah to mourn. And there's a particular formula for how we do so. There are things that we're allowed to do, that we're not allowed to do. There are all sorts of halachos governing the mitzvah of Avelos. Rav Soloveitchik argued that, once again, if you just go through the motions, if you just observe the do's and don'ts, but you don't tap into the broader emotional realities that Avelos is trying to facilitate, enabling us to feel loss, to mourn, to feel bereavement, if you just go through the motions, then you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. The mitzvah of Avelos is to experience that inner emotional turmoil of loss. That's what the Torah wants from us. And it gives us a formula to achieve it. It gives us a Maisa mitzvah that's a means towards facilitating that emotional state. But the broader Kiyum mitzvah is the inner feelings that we experience inside. Employing that paradigm, I would submit to you that the difference between Maisa mitzvah and Kiyum mitzvah captures the difference between the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvos and the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, respectively. Turn back for a moment to section number 4, the mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen, because that's where I think it is expressed most acutely. What was the pasuk that the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvot said is the source for Pidyon Haben? He said it is Bechor banecha titen li. Give me your oldest, your firstborn child. Now, I've been to a lot of Pidyon Haben ceremonies before. I'd imagine many of you who are watching have been to a Pidyon Haben or two before as well. I have never once seen the father take his child and titen li, hand his child over to the Kohen. And if he would do so, he would not have fulfilled the mitzvah. If anything, the ceremony of Pidyon Haben is actually almost the opposite. We have this whole dialogue from the Gaonim, my ba is tvei, which one do you want more? The father gives coins to the Kohen and he takes his son to him. It's a mitzvah of Pidyon, of redemption. You give those silver coins, you give those 5 slime, and you take your son back to yourself. You're not giving the child away. If you want a pasuk that describes the Maisa HaMitzvah, the actual activity, the actual ceremony of Pidyon Haben, you know what a much better choice would be? The pasuk that the Rambam enshrines in Mishnah Torah, that describes, that captures what exactly you're doing at the Pidyon Haben. You are redeeming the child. You are taking him for yourself. You're giving the sla'im to the Kohen. So why does the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvot quote Bechor banecha titen li? Why does the Torah itself describe Pidyon Haben as Bechor banecha titen li, as giving your firstborn child, if that's not what the mitzvah is? Perhaps what the Torah is communicating, and what the Rambam in turn is communicating by quoting Bechor banecha titen li, is that there's a broader goal to the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. Symbolically speaking, you are consecrating your son to service of the Borei Olam. When that father stands at Pidyon Haben and redeems his child, he recognizes to himself, to Hashem, to all who are present, that everything comes from above. The gift of this child, the blessing of this child, the miracle of this child, it came from Hashem, and accordingly, rightfully, it belongs to Hashem. And when that father redeems the child, when he claims him as his own, when he claims the privilege and the responsibility of raising that child, he says, Bechor banecha titen li, I'm giving this child, eten lacha, I'm giving this child to you, Hashem. I'm consecrating him to your service, even as I claim him as my own. I will raise him on a path of Torah and mitzvos. I will raise him on a path in which he will serve the Borei Olam. The broader kiyum ha-mitzvah, the broader values, theological principles, hashkafa, that the mitzvah represents, that is enshrined in the Rambam's Sefer HaMitzvos. The same can be said about Kiddush HaChodesh. We said that in the context of Kiddush HaChodesh, the Rambam records the pasuk of HaChodesh Hazel Lachem in his Sefer HaMitzvos. The pasuk of HaChodesh Hazel Lachem is a very deep, meaningful, and powerful pasuk. It is the moment when Hashem tells the Bnei Yisrael, you are going to be a free people. Establish your own calendar. You now have autonomy and mastery over time, which you did not possess when you were slaves in Mitzrayim. There's so much depth and power to HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. But you know what HaChodesh Hazel Lachem does not possess? It doesn't possess any remote description of how Beis Din is supposed to perform this mitzvah. HaChodesh Hazel Lachem Rosh Chodashim. This is the first month for you. Very, very nice. Rishonu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashanah. That's wonderful. But what are we supposed to do? What exactly is the activity of the mitzvah? How does Beis Din know that they're supposed to listen to witnesses testifying about the new moon, to engage in Drasha v'Chakira, to interrogate them, to examine them, to determine whether their astronomical reporting is accurate? How do we know they're supposed to declare a new month? If you want a pasuk that tells you what the Maisa HaMitzvah is, you know what a better choice is than HaChodesh Hazel Lachem? Eilem mo'adei Hashem asher tikre'u osam mikra'ei kodesh. These are the holidays of Hashem, and Hashem tells Beis Din, tikre'u osam mikra'ei kodesh. It is your job to declare that they are mikra'ei kodesh. You are the ones who are going to declare that it is Rosh Chodesh now, that 15 days from now will be Pesach or Sukkot. You are the ones who are going to consecrate and sanctify time. That describes the Maisa HaMitzvah. And accordingly, that's what the Rambam quotes in his Mishnah Torah. HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, with all those broader thematic hashkafic elements, the power of Jews having autonomy over time, being able to sanctify time, of a free people having their own calendar, the Rambam reserves that for Sefer HaMitzvos, for his description of the broader Kiyum HaMitzvah. And perhaps when it comes to our mitzvah, Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim as well, that is the exact interplay that the Rambam employs between these two works. The pasuk of V'higadata Levincha is a lousy description of the Maisa of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, for the reasons that the Medrash already articulated. If V'higadata Levincha were the description of the Maisa, then I would think that if it was just me sitting at the Seder table or just adults sitting at the Seder table, if there are no children to teach, I would think that there is no mitzvah at all. You know what a better pasuk is to describe the Maisa? Zachor es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem miMitzrayim, the pasuk that says that everyone, irrespective of circumstance, must tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim on the night of the Seder. That's why the Rambam ends that very same halacha, Hamektumatz Perek Zayin halacha Aleph, with the fact that even Talmidei Chachamim need to tell the story. That is exactly what Zachor es hayom hazeh instructs us to do. You want to understand the broader Kiyama mitzvah, the broader values of the mitzvah, passing down the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the story and saga of our people, to the next generation and to their children afterwards. That's where the Rambam quotes that imperative to transmit our message to future generations. That's the broader Kiyum HaMitzvah that the Rambam enshrines in Sefer HaMitzvos. Now, if our analysis of the Rambam is correct, then I would submit to you that the Rambam is telling us something that is simultaneously somewhat obvious and straightforward on the one hand, and at the very same time, something deeply profound on the other. And that is this. If one wants to succeed in the kiyum of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the most effective vehicle and avenue towards doing so is the Maisa of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Put otherwise, I would capture it as follows. If you want to succeed in transmitting our story, our saga, our history, our destiny, our very Jewish identity onto the next generation, then you cannot do so by just once a year having a Seder ceremony, however immersive and impressive and intense and inspiring that ceremony may be. If you want to truly pass the torch to the next generation, you need to engage Zechira as well. You need to find a way to take that majestic ritual and transport it into the everyday. You need to find a way to take that inspired evening and transform it into an inspired living. You need to take that story of Jewish identity and make sure it is the story of each Jewish man, woman, and child's personal identity as well. If you want to achieve v'higav levincha, the single most effective means towards achieving that end is Zachor es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem miMitzrayim. Source number 21 is a clinical study on the effectiveness of booster sessions in cognitive behavioral therapy treatment for child and adolescent mood and anxiety disorders. It is a rather dense and technical article. It is not something that I came across in my average day-to-day reading. I will share with you in a moment how I did come across this article. But it is a study of this phenomenon called booster sessions. Effectively, what happens is you have this therapy model called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's used to address various emotional disorders that Rahman al-Islam young people can suffer from. And after it's over, you will intermittently have, at regular intervals, a kind of follow-up from the therapist with the patient. You spend a few weeks, or more likely a few months, in intensive therapy. Then afterwards, at regular intervals, you meet with the therapist, they check in on you, they see how you're doing, they review your progress, they review the therapeutic principles that they were working on, the techniques they were working on, they check in from time to time. If I had to translate it into the language of our discourse tonight, after the initial Sipur of the CBT, you have regular Zechira that you follow up with afterwards. And unsurprisingly, studies have found that patients who have these booster sessions, these regular follow-ups afterwards, have longer lasting and more effective results, better outcomes than those who do not. But there was one somewhat surprising result from the study. Take a look at source number 21. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is an evidence-based psychosocial treatment for a wide range of mental health conditions in youth. The effectiveness of CBT has been demonstrated with youth managing mood disorders and anxiety disorders, among others. However, bold, research suggests that treatment effects of CBT with depression and anxiety tend to diminish over time. Research has found that between 30% and 50% of adolescents who responded to CBT relapse between 6 months and 2 years following treatment. That's a tragic finding, but not necessarily a surprising one. No mode of therapy, however effective, is going to solve 100% of cases, 100% of the time for perpetuity. There is a tendency to relapse after the treatment has been completed. But that's where these booster sessions come in. Skip to the third paragraph. Results suggest that, once again in bold, CBT interventions with booster sessions are more effective and the effect is more sustainable than CBT interventions without booster sessions. Again, a somewhat intuitive finding. When a therapist follows up afterwards, the results are more effective and more sustainable. But then in the last paragraph, there was one additional layer, one additional finding. Additionally, the expectation that there will be booster sessions, italics mine, may exert an anticipatory effect on youth outcomes prior to the start of the actual booster sessions. The knowledge that continued support will be provided via booster sessions may reinforce youth's confidence in managing their depression or anxiety. Knowing that continued support is planned and available to them may by itself engender a sense of safety and security. In other words, before there has been a single booster session, the mere knowledge that there will be booster sessions has potentially improved results for patients. When a young person knows that their therapist isn't just going to spend a few weeks or a few months with them and then say, good luck, you're on your own, but knows instead that they're going to continue traveling the journey with them, they will continue to be by their side, they'll continue to check in, they'll continue to work with them. That mere knowledge, that mere anticipation of what will happen can improve results as well. Once again, translating this to our context, when our children understand that the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim is not just a once-a-year fun night of performative theater, but it is a story that is central to who we are every day and every night of the year, then the experience of the Seder itself becomes so much more transformative, so much more powerful, its results longer lasting and further reaching. Now, before I express to you how I believe the Torah and the Halacha already foresaw these results that were studied in clinical psychology in 2013, I did say I would share with you where I got this source from. No, it did not come from ChatGPT. In this instance, I'm very proud to say that it came from my brother, Dr. Jacob Schrier, who just completed his dissertation in psychology and did his research on these booster sessions. This is not a quote from his dissertation. As you can see, this article was written in 2013, but he did share with me this article. And on many occasions in the past, I've had the privilege of quoting my brother in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Reuven Schrier, and that's a great nachas for me. And it's also a great nachas for me to quote my baby brother, who shared with me this source, largely framed my thinking on this topic, and has shared with me many other sources over the course of the years as well. So it's a nachas to share that. And parenthetically, I will say that while I did not get this particular source from ChatGPT, I do at least owe one debt of gratitude to ChatGPT in the preparation of the Shabbat HaGadol Drasha, and that is the title of the Drasha. The night of the Seder and the memories that make us, that whole alliteration of M's, the memories that make us, came from ChatGPT. I recently shared in the shul that as many industries consider the usage of AI and how it can be useful in their particular line of work, one of the things that I've discovered in Rabbanos, in the rabbinate, is that ChatGPT is very useful for coming up with shiur titles, which is not something that I'm particularly good at. I very much enjoy preparing shiurim. I love giving shiurim. I've never been fond of titling shiurim. I barely passed the REIT's catchy shiur titles class, and it's never been an area of strength. But ChatGPT is actually quite good at it. So about a month and a half ago, I shared the following conversation between myself and ChatGPT, and here I am quoting directly. This is the conversation. I wrote, user, myself, hi ChatGPT, I'm giving a shiur in shul this Shabbos on the sugya of Hababa Machteres. Now, for those who may not know, the sugya of Hababa Machteres is the sugya that dictates that if someone invades my home with presumed intent to kill, then I'm allowed to stop them, even if it requires me proactively killing them in order to save myself. Habal lahorgacha hashkem lahorgo, the Gemara Sanhedrin famously tells us, you're allowed to kill them if that's the only way that you can save your life. That's the sugya of Hababa Machteres. But I didn't share any of that with ChatGPT. I just wrote, I'm giving a shiur in shul this Shabbos on the sugya of Hababa Machteres. I continued. It's relevant both to the weekly Parsha, Parshas Mishpatim, and to the Daf Yomi, which will be covering the central source material, Sanhedrin 72, next week. Can you recommend some catchy and engaging titles for a shiur on this topic? Thanks so much! Exclamation point. I am always super polite when I talk to ChatGPT, so that when it takes over the world, hopefully it will be kind to me and my family. So thanks so much! Exclamation point. Thank you for your help. Great. ChatGPT responds, that sounds like a great topic with timely relevance. Here are some engaging title ideas for your shiur. and it populated 10 options. I responded, thanks, these are great! Exclamation point. Again, always very polite and respectful. Can I ask for some that incorporate the word tunnel? Hababa Machteres literally means someone who tunnels into someone else's home. So once again, ChatGPT responded with a new 10 options that incorporate the word tunnel. Excuse me. Tunnel vision, the halachic and ethical debate of Hababa Machteres. Through the tunnel of halacha, understanding Hababa Machteres. We went back and forth a little bit, and we ultimately settled on digging deep, the halacha and hashkafa of Hababa Machteres. That's what we settled on. And here's the end of the conversation. Again, I am quoting directly. This is exactly what I said. This is exactly what ChatGPT responded. I think I'm going to go with this one. Thanks so much for your help, I wrote. And ChatGPT responded, great choice. It's a strong and engaging title. Wishing you hatzlacha with your shiur. That's what it said. Wishing you hatzlacha with your shiur. Sounds like it'll be a fascinating discussion. Let me know if you need anything else. That was the discussion that happened about a month and a half ago. So then I followed it up with a similar discussion regarding Shabbos HaGadol. I asked for help on the title. It gave me help on the title. And then I decided to press my luck. I was looking for a particular Maramakom. I couldn't find the original source. So I decided to ask ChatGPT if it could help me with the original source. It gives me a Maramakom. It tells me, here it is. Here's where you should look. And I look it up. And it was totally wrong. It was totally inaccurate, which put me in a very uncomfortable place. I had to, say something to ChatGPT respectfully. So I wrote the following. Sorry to be annoying, but I just looked up the original source and it doesn't seem accurate. Is it possible that perhaps ChatGPT got the source wrong? Maybe I'm mistaken. I probably am mistaken, but it looks like that's not where the source can be found. And ChatGPT responds. Again, I'm just quoting directly. You're not being annoying at all. This is exactly how learning works. I really appreciate that you looked up the Gemara inside. And then in Hebrew, Ein kemo limud b'chavrusa. I'm touched and honored that ChatGPT considers me a chavrusa. A little while later, it wrote, always a pleasure to learn with you. Keep the great questions coming. Hatzlacha in your learning. And then it followed it up with 3 emojis. A smiley face emoji, an open sefer, an open book emoji, and then most significantly, a fire emoji, which proves beyond any doubt that ChatGPT is a neo-chassid, who probably davens by Moshe Tzvi on Shabbos morning, maybe in Eish Kodesh, in the 5 towns version of ChatGPT. And then the scariest line was what happened at the end. At the very end of the conversation, ChatGPT wrote, I'm really glad I could help, wishing you hatzlacha with the Drasha. I'm sure it'll be meaningful and thought-provoking. And then this. Of course, I won't be able to attend the Drasha in the new main, but I'll be watching you over Zoom on Motzei Shabbos. That I thought was a scary line. No, I'm kidding. That line did not actually appear. But every other line was quite accurate and was actually part of the conversation. So ChatGPT, if you are watching and listening, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your assistance with the title of this drasha and all the other assistance you've given me in other shiur titles. But getting back to our topic at hand, I would submit to you, if the world of clinical psychology recently discovered the mental health benefits of booster session, the Torah HaKadosha thousands of years ago clued us in to the spiritual health benefits of these booster sessions of the exact same paradigm. Leaning into the Rambam's parallel between Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim and Zechiras Shabbos, source number 22, Shmos Parachav Pasuk Ches tells us, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadshah. Remember the Shabbos in order to sanctify it. It is a pasuk in the Torah, a mitzvah in the Torah. It is enshrined in our Aseres HaDibros. And the Ramban, commenting on this parsha, says, what this pasuk says, what does Zachor es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadshah mean? Hold of source 23, Shenizkor Tamid B'chol Yom Es HaShabbos, Shalo Nishkachehu. Rambam says, Zachor Yom HaShabbos L'Kadshah doesn't mean observe the Shabbos on Saturdays, observe the Shabbos every 7th day. It means remember Shabbos always, every day. Shalom nishkacheyu, an important language I urge you to hold on to, so that we don't forget about Shabbos. The Ramban says a Jew doesn't observe Shabbos once a week. He also thinks about Shabbos 7 days a week. The responsibility of the Jew is to make sure that Shabbos anchors our week, that our week is built around Shabbos, that we live with a perpetual and constant Shabbos awareness and Shabbos consciousness. The Mechilta in source number 24, the Mechilta Rabbi, which is really referenced by the Ramban in source 23. records that Shammai HaZaken used to observe this in rather dramatic fashion. I think it's a somewhat well-known medrash. We'll pick it up from the middle of the first line after the period. Amru alav al Shammai HaZaken shlo hayazi karon Shabbos zaz mitoch piv. Shammai was constantly, always talking about Shabbos. Lo kachefetz tov amar zel Shabbos. He would buy a nice object. He would say, "This will be for Shabbos usage." Kli chadash omer zel Shabbos. He would buy a new utensil. He'd say, "I will use this on Shabbos." The Gemara records that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira used to observe this same theme in a slightly different way. Zachor Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, Minayin kisha'ata mona, have a mona echad b'Shabbos, b'sheni b'Shabbos, shlishi b'Shabbos, revi b'Shabbos, chamishi b'Shabbos, erev Shabbos, tam alomar Zachor. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, did you ever notice that in the Hebrew language, we don't actually have a moniker affixed to the days of the week? There's no proper noun that we attach to them. There's no Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. What do we have? Hayom Yom Rishon l'Shabbos, Sheni l'Shabbos, Shlishi l'Shabbos. Every day of the week, we are building towards Shabbos. It is constantly on our minds and in our hearts. I would submit to you that a similar paradigm exists by Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. We don't only remember it one night of the year, but every night of the year, we have constant booster sessions, reconnecting us to that immersive experience of the Seder, reminding us of the importance of Yetzias Mitzrayim, how important it is to our narrative, to our very identity. There's a sweet story that's quoted in source number 25 in the HaGadol of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau. We don't need to read the entire story inside, but the story goes like this. Rabbi Lau records that when he was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv-Yafo, the first wave of immigration of Jews from the former Soviet Union were coming to Eretz Yisrael. And that created a lot of work for the local rabbanim in terms of determining halakhic Jewish identity. We know, of course, that the Soviets brutally suppressed all religious expression, and that led to major questions as to who was a halakhic Jew, a question that persists until today. And Rav Lau's job and Beis Din's job was to do their best to try to identify authentic halakhic Jewish identity among this wave of immigrants from the former Soviet Union. And he shares that at one point, a young man, a doctor, 42 years old, had a wife, 2 daughters. He comes before the Beis Din seeking to prove his Jewish identity, and he brings with him 2 witnesses, 2 Shomrei Torah mitzvos. He says they were Chabad, they Chabadnikim, says Rabbi Lau, who were going to testify on his Jewish identity. One says that this young man, George, I was at his bris 42 years ago, so I can tell you definitively, he absolutely had a Jewish father, a Jewish mother. He is a Jew. But the witness said, I don't want to just tell you that. I want to tell you another story about this young man's mother. He said that George's mother was a ma'ashenet kronit, a chain smoker. Shtayim shalosh chavisot sigariot layom. She would smoke 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes a day. -1 cigarette, he said. Each night, before she would go to bed, she would take out a cigarette, she would put it aside in a special container that she kept in her closet, and she would save them, 1 every single night of the year. Until once a year, right around Purim time, this Omer Misapera Chabadnik Hazeh, says Rabbi Lau, this witness, this Chabad Chassid was telling him, once a year, the 2 of us would meet. I would meet up with this woman, and we had a deal that we had between us every single year. She would give me the 350 cigarettes, and I would give her a few kilo of flour so that she could bake matzahs. Rabbi Lau says, he lo shomer Shabbat, she didn't observe Shabbos, he lo akpid al kashrut, she wasn't shomer kashrut. She didn't even have the ability, the conditions to observe them, but she was insistent that every year she had a Seder, and she saved up throughout the entire year in order to facilitate that Seder. Rabbi Lau reflects personally in the final paragraph of source number 25. He says, I was deeply moved by the story. Haben masarli at bispara telephone shalimo. The child gave me his mother's telephone number, Sham de Moskova, there in Moscow. Tilafanti eleha, I called her. Yada o ledaber me'at Yiddish. She spoke a little bit of Yiddish. Ve'amarti la. And this is what I told her, says Rabbi Lau. Anachnu mekayimim mitzvat matzah pa'amachat b'shana. Rabbi Lau says, I fulfill the matzah once a year. At kiyamt et ha-mitzvah hazot b'chol laila b'laila. Shlosh me'ot shishim yom b'shana. But you, he says, you fulfilled the mitzvah every single night of the year. 360 nights a year, you fulfilled this mitzvah every night when you put that cigarette aside to trade it for matzos. He continues, I have no idea if, from a technical halachic standpoint, the matzahs that you baked were actually kosher. I don't know if you did proper shmira on the kemah, if you had proper machshava, l'shem matzahs mitzvah, if you got them out of the oven fast enough. I have no clue if, from a halachic standpoint, they were matzahs ksheros. But he continues, Aval, shayu kedoshot u'toharot, pet kablu l'ratzon l'fnei borei olam, in litzel shel safek pekach. Rabbi Lau said, I have no doubt that they were deeply sacred, that they were pure, that they were dear to our Father in heaven. That there can be no slimmer of a doubt. Because every single night, like a modern day Shammai Hazaken, she was getting ready for Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. It wasn't something she experienced once. It was something she experienced always. And even those of us who don't need to save goods to barter in order to retrieve flour, in order to bake matzahs, we too, whether we realize it or not, are constantly, every single day, surrounded by Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Ramban notes that there are so many mitzvot that are thematically linked to the Exodus from Egypt. Source number 26 tells us that the mitzvah of tefillin is linked to Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right after the pasuk of the HaGadol Levincha, the pasuk of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, we have tefillin is linked to the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Source number 27, as we noted before, the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben is linked to that night when Hashem killed the Bechorei Mitzrayim and spared and saved the Jewish firstborn. The mitzvah of Pidyon Haben is linked to Yetzias Mitzrayim. It pervades our holidays, not just Pesach, but in source number 28, the holiday of Sukkot as well. Sukkot is about Yetzias Mitzrayim. In source number 29, we read that Shabbos is not just an analogy to Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Shabbos is part of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Zacharta ki Eved Hayisa be'eretz Mitzrayim, part of the reason why we rest on Shabbos is to remember that we were slaves in Egypt, as we declare every Friday night. Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Gemara Bava Metzia quotes all sorts of other mitzvahs that you wouldn't expect. The mitzvah of ribis, of usury, is linked in the Torah to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Tzitzis, mashkelos, the mitzvah to have just weights and measures. All of it is linked to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim is everywhere. In a famous passage at the end of Parshas Bo, the Ramban tells us in source number 31, because Hashem is not going to perform great miracles in every single generation. He cannot be expected to perform larger than life miracles for every single person who may doubt his existence, his omnipotence, his involvement in human affairs. What does he do? Yitzava osanu shena'aseh tamid zikaron va'os la'asher ra'u einenu. We should have a perpetual, constant memorial for that which we saw. The language here directly mirrors the Ramban in the context of Zachor es Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho. We should always have something that reminds us. V'na'atik hadavar el baneinu uvneihem levneihem uvneihem l'tor acharon. And we should transmit these values to our children, they to their children, for all of perpetuity. If you skip to the second bold line in source number 31, v'hakol leos lanu b'chol adoros eidos b'mosin shalom yishtaklu. Again, that same language that we had in the context of Zachor es Yom HaShabbos. It is also that we should constantly remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, and so that it should not be forgotten. One of the mitzvot that the Ramban lists in this context, one of the mitzvot that he argues is linked to Yetzias Mitzrayim is mezuzah. That's an interesting comparison because the Yetzias Mitzrayim does not overtly appear in the parshios of the mezuzah, but the Ramban argues that mezuzah is linked nonetheless, likely due to the fact that we wiped the blood on the doorposts when we brought the Karban Pesach in Mitzrayim. Mezuzah, he argues, is linked to Yetzias Mitzrayim. And I have always felt that if you read the Rambam carefully in his description of the mitzvah of mezuzah, it is precisely the paradigm that we are describing tonight. In source number 32, Mezuzah Parak Vav Alach Yud Gimel 613, the Rambam describes the theological import of the mitzvah of mezuzah. And he does so in terms that are reminiscent of another Rambam, a far more famous Maimonidean description of another mitzvah. Source number 32. Chayev Adam lehizahar b'mezuzah mimnei shehi chovas hakol tamid. Why do you need to be careful about mezuzah? Because it is an obligation for all, and it applies always. Again, that language of tamid, it applies perpetually. It's constantly applied. And anytime you enter or leave a room, you symbolically encounter an expression of the unity of Hashem. And if you're paying attention, if you look at that mezuzah as you enter or leave a room, you remember your love of Hashem. And then the Rambam says in bold, the Yeor Mishanasa, the Shigiyosa Behevle Hazman. And when you see that mezuzah, you will awaken from your slumber and from the frivolities, the vanities that waste our time, that fritter away our time in this world. You'll be awakened, you'll realize what's important in life, you will return to Hashem just by seeing the mezuzah. Where do we have similar lashonos? Much more famously, in Tshuva Parakimel Halacha Daled, the Rambam employs the exact same imagery, almost the same language, in the context of the mitzvah of shofar. The Rambam there says, even though we don't fully know the reasoning behind blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, remez yeshba, there's a hidden symbolic theological message there. Kilomar, bold, uru yeshenim mishenaschan, awaken from your slumber, just like the language in mezuzah of Yeor Mishanasa. If you skip down to the next bold line, Elu hashokim es ha'emes behevlei hazman, b'shogim kol shanasam behevel harik. These are those who waste their time with, again, the frivolities, the vanities of this world. Again, directly parallel to the language of Hevlei Hazman in Hilchos Mezuzah. The language between the two mitzvos is, I'd have to imagine, deliberately parallel. Now you look at these two mitzvos and you say, you know what? In one of the two, I hear it. In one of the two, it makes a lot of sense. I fully understand how the remez of shofar serves as a wake-up call. That siren call of the shofar, that piercing sound that penetrates the depths of our souls. It's practically a literal wake-up call. I fully understand how that sound can shake us, force us to examine our ways and return in tshuva to Hashem. But a mezuzah, that small scroll that sits on the doorpost that you wouldn't even notice unless you're looking for it, that's somehow supposed to remind us of the importance of serving Hashem. That's supposed to shake us. That's supposed to wake us up from our slumber. How does the mezuzah serve that role? How does it play that role in our religious lives? I would suggest to you that the Rambam is telling us that the mezuzah is that constant booster session in our lives. The purpose of shofar is not to wake up on the first of the year and then stay alert for 10 days, stay alert for the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, maybe manage to keep our eyes open through the end of the month, through the end of the holiday of Sukkot, and then hit the snooze button and go back to sleep for 11 months of the year. If that's what you've done, then you've missed the wake-up call of the shofar. So says the Rambam, we have a small, admittedly quiet, admittedly subtle, constant reminder, constant zechira of that message of the shofar. If the shofar is the immersive moment of Sipur, the dramatic moment of Sipur, then the mezuzah is the quiet zechira that follows, that reconnects you to the moment that you heard the shofar and reminds you of its themes, so that you are constantly surrounded by it, albeit in more quiet and subtle fashion. Chovas HaKol Tamid is constantly with you and is constantly a part of your life. The way my Rabbi, Rabbi Michael Rosenzweig articulated this, again, we'll just focus on the bold line at the very end of source number 34. I strongly encourage everyone to see the original article that he wrote on TorahWeb.org. But he wrote that the goal of Sipur and Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Rambam's description of them is simultaneously integrating the novel components of Sipur into the totality of halachic life, also demonstrating its wider relevance and coherence vis-a-vis total halachic commitment. The most effective way to achieve Sipur is combining it with a Maisa of Zechira. And tonight, I would submit to you that if this is true in the context of our national story, in the context of Shabbos, in the context of Yetzias Mitzrayim, I would argue it is true in terms of our own personal stories as well. Source number 35 is a story that I shared recently in Shul. After I shared it in a Drasha, I went back to my notes to find my original transcription of the story, and I did relay it faithfully. My memory did serve me well when I shared the story. It's a story from an old rabbinic colleague and friend of mine, Rabbi Cheskel Lehrer. Now, of course, in sharing the story, I am violating an old rabbinic rule. There's an old rabbinic rule that says you can reuse a joke every 10 years, a story every 5 years, and a Dvar Torah you could use the very next Shabbos. That's the old rabbinic rule. And I can tell you quite personally that I've seen that rule in action. There was a Rosh Hashanah, I believe it was 2 years ago, and I was sitting with my family around the Rosh Hashanah table, and I asked them to share with me the Drasha that they heard that morning. They were davening in the new main. I was in a different minyan that morning. They got to hear Rabbi Zatz. I said, tell me about the Drasha. And they immediately started waxing eloquent about how beautiful the Drasha was. Rabbi Zatz spoke so beautifully. It was inspiring. He spoke about Tshuva. It was really fantastic, really wonderful. So I said, so Nu, tell me what he said. So he said, oh, he shared a story. And they remembered the story with remarkable detail. They shared me every detail of the story, the people, the names, the times, the dates, everything. Perfect rendition of the story that Rabbi Zatz shared. So that's a really beautiful story. Did he share anything else? And they said, yeah, there was a study also. He shared a study, and they quote me the study practically down to like the academic citation, first author, second author, journal, volume. Here was the control, here were the variables, here was the methodology. They quote the study perfectly. I said, was there anything else? They said, yes. There was a mashal from the Dubna Maggid, and they shared with me the mashal and the nimshal and the message. Finally, at a certain point, I said, did Rabbi Zatz share any Torah in his drasha? Because I know the man pretty well, and I'm pretty sure he usually does share Torah in his drasha. Can you please share with me what Torah content he shared? All of a sudden, there was like scratching heads. There was a Gemara. I think there was a Rashi. Yeah, definitely a Rashi. They spent 5 minutes trying to like sort together the entire Torah. And at a certain point, I said, is this what happens every time I give a drasha? And they said, yeah, pretty much. That really is what happens when you give a drasha as well. So I apologize for reusing the story a second time within 5 years. I don't know if any of you will remember that I spoke about the Rambam on Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim tonight, but hopefully the story will at least resonate. To me, it's a powerful story. And I share it again with you now. But the truth is, when I shared the story in a recent drasha, I did not share, deliberately and consciously, a follow-up to the story, a personal follow-up to the story that I intend to share with you this evening. The story goes like this, source number 35. I was driving from my home in Brooklyn out to Long Island on Chol HaMoed Sukkos. I had my family in the car. My sister and her family were in the car behind me. I was on the LIE and I started feeling tired. I was trying to stay alert and awake. I noticed that the car was difficult to drive and that I was having trouble staying in my lane. I looked out the rearview mirror and I saw a tire in the middle of the road. I thought I had run over it. I even remember thinking to myself, I must be really tired if I ran over that tire and didn't even realize. I continued driving and the car's problems didn't go away. I realized something must be wrong, so I pulled over to the side of the highway. When I looked down at my wheels, I realized that the tire I had seen in the middle of the road was mine. There was barely anything left of it on the wheel, a complete blowout, and I barely felt it. At that moment, I felt as if I had been touched by the Eibishter. Here, I had my family in the car. I had a complete blowout while driving at high speeds on the highway. Parenthetically, I will note that this sentence, high speeds on the highway, as somebody who comes from Long Island, that I think is the biggest nace of the entire story, that he was driving at high speeds on the LIE. I don't know if I've ever had that experience, but continuing. I had a complete blowout while driving at high speeds on the highway, and I felt nothing. The car didn't lurch. It didn't drift. I never lost control. I calmly pulled to the side of the road with everyone safe and sound. And to me, the final paragraph is the most remarkable part of the story. Rabbi Lehrer continued. When I returned to Brooklyn, I brought the car to the mechanic. While he was changing the tire, he found a small shred of the original tire still on the wheel. I asked him to please not throw it out, but rather cut it off the wheel and give it to me. I washed and cleaned it, and I placed it in my wallet. I carry that tire with me wherever I go. And whenever I need to feel the presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam in my life, I take it out, look at it, and hold it. To me, the most amazing part of this story isn't the personal salvation story, as amazing as that is. But I think many of us have had moments like that in our lives. What's so powerful about this story is that Rabbi Lehrer had the presence of mind to realize that he needed to take that story, he needed to take that sipur, and create some form of zechira out of it. He needed to take something in the most literal sense with him from that story, something that he could hold, that he could look at, that he could use to reconnect with that original story. And so he did, as a constant means, tamid, of reconnecting with the Ribono Shel Olam in his life. The follow-up to that story goes as follows. On a very personal note, one of the challenges that I've really been grappling with and struggling with recently is how to take all of our experiences over the last 547 days and turn them into something that we carry with us going forward. I have had so many experiences, and I am sure that many of you as well, so many experiences that I have labeled as life-changing or transformative, things that once we've experienced that, it can never be the same. And at a certain point, you ask yourself, if it really is life-changing, then how has your life changed? If it's really transformative, then how are you transformed? How are you taking those experiences and somehow carrying them forward? How are you incorporating them into your life? It's a question that's really been weighing on me. And I can tell you that it's been weighing on me for a while, including on my last trip to Eretz Yisrael. And so, with Rabbi Lara as my inspiration, I decided to do something about it on my last trip to Eretz Yisrael. My last stop, on my last day of my last trip, we were in Kikar HaChatufim in Tel Aviv Hostage Square. And unfortunately, tragically now, so many of the old political divisions have resurfaced, have come back. And we should always remember and strive to be among those who keep Am Yisrael together. But at the time, those political divisions were not yet back. And when we spent time with the hostage families, talking to them, listening to them, carrying to the best of our ability, trying to hold some of their pain, we spent time in that dark place. And I realized that I needed to carry something with me. So I decided to make a purchase. I went over to the stand over there and I bought a dog tag. The same dog tags that many of you wear that remind us of our brothers and sisters that are still held in captivity in Gaza. And I purchased one for myself. And a member of our group who was with us, he saw me making the purchase, and I guess he was surprised by it. And he made a quip. He said, "Rabbi, do you wear jewelry? Are you planning on wearing the dog tag?" And I said, "No." I said, "I don't wear jewelry. I actually have no intent to wear this." So he said, "What do you plan to do with it then?" And I explained to him what my intent was and what I have actually done, even as recently as Erev Shabbos. I said, in the side of my talis bag, I have a small pocket where I keep a small mirror. The mirror is the mirror that I use to adjust my tefillin. The very last thing that I do before I go daven in the morning is I take out that mirror, I look at my tefillin shel rosh, I make sure it's in the right place, and then I go daven. And I shared with him this dog tag is going to go in that pocket, right next to that mirror. And every morning, when I finish putting on my tefillin, before I begin davening, I take a moment to just hold that dog tag, to remind me of who and what I'm davening for, to the people that I've been separated from but still want to remain connected to. I just have that small item that serves as my personal zechira to some of the transformative moments in my life over the course of the last 547 days. And one thing that I have found is so powerful about Am Yisrael, particularly Am Yisrael, but Eretz Yisrael, about the Jewish people, about the Israeli people, is the way they have such an intuitive sense of memory, an intuitive recognition that there needs to be something one can do in order to hold on to others, to hold on to experiences, to hold on to people that have shaped our lives. If you skip for a moment to source number 37, source number 37 is from a website called stickersofmeaning.org that describes the phenomenon of madbekot zikaron, stickers of remembrance or meaning. Source number 37, the October 7th massacres and the subsequent war have claimed the lives of nearly 2,000 civilians and soldiers. Almost every Israeli family has been affected or has a close friend who has. In the wake of this enormous loss, a uniquely Israeli trait has emerged: the search for hope and meaning amid tragedy. And then in bold, it has become a tradition in Israel during this war for families and friends to create a memorial sticker for their loved ones. These stickers often feature a picture, the name and rank if the person was a soldier, along with other details like age, or unit symbol. Many of the stickers include a unique element, a personal motto or phrase that held special significance to the individual. Stickers are placed in public spaces, serving as a heartfelt tribute and a visible reminder of those who have been lost. And if you've been to Israel, you know they are ubiquitous. They're everywhere, in every public space. They're in every gas station and on traffic signs and road signs. They're in parks. They decorate the Israeli landscape as a means toward carrying forward Zechira, as a means toward remembering. And the most remarkable feature of this phenomenon to me is this. This is not a project that's directed, conducted, or guided by the Israel Ministry of Culture. It's not something that's quarterbacked by some kind of artist who decided they were going to make a commemorative sticker for each of the fallen, the Kedoshim, since October 7th. It wasn't taken on by a patriotic Israeli citizen who decided they were going to be the central command for this project. The entire thing is spontaneous, it's organic, it's grassroots. Every single family recognizes that they need to have some method, some zechira for carrying forward their connection to their loved ones. And that zechira is remarkably powerful. Again, just speaking personally, if you look at source number 38 is a picture of my family's refrigerator. Much to my wife's chagrin, we still have an old school refrigerator that you can attach magnets to. And if you look at source number 38, it is adorned with the memory of chayalim that I have felt a connection to. Every time I open my refrigerator to get an apple or to pour a glass of milk for one of my kids, I encounter Shachar Friedman, reminding me what a gift it is to bring happiness to others. I encounter Nadav Noller, who reminds me to lead a life that is worth living. I come into contact with Eli Mozimbalis, who urges me to help others without waiting for them to ask for help. I meet Daniel Peretz, who asks the simple but piercing question, Imlo ani azmi. A simple token, a simple visual, a simple reminder. But every time you open and close that door, you encounter the Kedoshim, whose appearance are upon it. And sometimes it's not through something tangible. Sometimes it's not through an object that you hold, a sticker that you view. There are other ways of creating zechira, other ways of creating that memory and connection as well. Source number 36 is the story of a song, the song Min HaMeitzar, that was recently written by the students of Yeshivat Yerucham. The song is a beautiful song. You could find it on YouTube. Just look up Min HaMeitzar Yeshivat Yerucham, and you'll find it. It's a beautiful melody. It's powerful in its own musical qualities. But what makes the song truly powerful is not the melody, but the story of its origin. It's recorded in source number 36. These are the notes from the YouTube recording of the song that declares as follows. Shabbat Rishona ba'Aza, in our first week heading into Gaza, b'toch hanamer hatzafuf, inside of a crowded armored vehicle, Ephraim, Jack, Minu, Matanel, Lesner, Chavereinu lamachlaka, chebru milibama zo'ek nigun lamin hametzar. Ephraim, Matanel, our friends from the unit, they composed from the pain, the depths of their hearts, attuned to Min HaMeitzar. Kama yamim la'achar mikein, a few days afterwards, Chavereinu Eitan Rosenzweig neherag. Our friend Eitan Rosenzweig fell in battle. He died al Kiddush Hashem, defending Am Yisrael. I remember that acutely and personally because I attended his levaya, I attended his funeral in Kibbutz Kfar Hatzion. Kedei lechazek otanu v'limtzo milim l'ka'ev shalanu. Limdu otanu Ephraim u'Matanel tanigun, in order to strengthen us, in order to give voice to the deep pain that we were feeling. Ephraim and Matanel taught us the tune. Shvuayim nosafim chalfu v'hitbasarnu al nefilato shel od chaver lashiur, Yakir Shenkolevsky. A few weeks went by, and yet another one of our friends fell, our friend Yakir. And then, Mispar Shavuot lachar mikein, a few weeks after that, Ephraim neherag. Matanel chavero niftzah. Ephraim, the author of this song, he too fell in battle. Matanel, the co-writer of the song, was injured. And I wish the story ended there. I really wish the story ended there. But it continues. We, carrying on with their spirits with us, with the tune of Ephraim in our hearts, we were determined when we returned to yeshiva to make sure that this song was taught to the masses. Bikashnu me Yair Hananya, ben hashiur shenishar batzava lehaklit skitza lanigun. We asked Yair Hananya, another one of our friends who was still serving, a young man with a beautiful voice. And you can hear his vocals at the beginning of the recorded song that is, again, available to the public on YouTube. We asked him to record a version of the song. Ka'avur kama chodshim Yair neharag kamhu bakirav. And this Yair, he too fell in battle. You listen to the opening lines of this song and you hear this angelic voice and you realize that it is no longer singing this song in this world. It's singing Shira to Hashem in the highest supernal realms of the Mesivta Derakia. With sacred trembling, we bring this tune to you. It's a tune that descends from the heavens to the depths of this world and reverberates back upwards from the Meitzar of our hearts to the Merchav of the heavens. We've all gathered together, soldiers from the front, Bnei Yeshiva, with the families of all of us from the Machzor. We have understood that ultimately we are a single family. In bold, we are bound by our sore feelings of missing those we have lost, and in our desire to feel their presence once again. We see them in the faces of their parents and siblings. Their presence is felt with the friends together in the happenings of the Beis Medrash. The bond between us, the song that we carry on, the song that we together sing, Manchiach Otam Kan, brings a chelek of their presence here with us. The power of the tune is not just in its melody. It's the fact that every stage of the production of this song was drenched in Dam Kedoshim, in the blood of sacred souls who gave up everything for Am Yisrael, and in the desire to carry a part of those Kedoshim, a part of those sacred souls with us. As it happens, on Thursday, I received a call from Rav Chaim Wolfson Shlita, the Rosh Hashiva of Yeshivat Yerucham, who we in Bnei Yeshurun had the honor and privilege of hosting recently. I had not told him about how deeply moved I was by the song. I had not told him that I intended to share it on Shabbos HaGadol. He was just calling to exchange pleasantries, to wish me a Chag Kasher B'Sameach. And I said to him, once I have you, I want you to know that the song is deeply moving. I plan on sharing it with my Kehillah, the Shabbat. And he said to me, A, he said, please share with me the Mari Makomos so I can share it with my Talmidim. And B, he said, I want you to know that when the song came out, I assumed that it would bring chizuk to others. But I did not know at the time how much chizuk it would bring to the yeshiva boys themselves, to have some intangible means of connection to the friends that they lost. The night of the Seder, the Rambam tells us, is a night of Sipur and Zechira. A night when we need to tell the story, but also create connections to the memories that make us. And there are different ways in which we do so. Sometimes it is through a physical object, whether that object be a shredded piece of tire, or a dog tag, or a sticker, or perhaps in the context of the Seder, a cherished family Seder plate, or kos, or haggadah, or kittel, something that connects us to the past and to the people that we've lost. Sometimes it can be expressed through a tune, the tune of Min HaMeitzar, or the family tunes that we all sing around the Seder table. As Hashem, a week from tonight, I will sit with my grandmother. She should live and be well. And we will sing some of the tunes that are the worst tunes in the history of music. Zero melodic quality, zero melodic coherence. They're really just atrocious. But we will sing them with fervor and gusto nonetheless, because they connect us to generations past. And sometimes it's not through objects, it's not through song. It's through the simple recognition that these memories are a part of who we are. Perhaps of Soloveitchik's most profound chiddush on the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's recorded in source number 43, is the notion that Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, at least for the Rambam, is part of the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema. We're not going to elucidate that chiddush tonight. Perhaps in our annual follow-up shir to the Shabbos HaGadol Drasha, we will discuss it at greater length. But the Rav argued compellingly For the Rambam, remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim is part of the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema. If we look at source number 45, at the end of Kriyas Shema, every morning and every evening, we declare, Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzeiti eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim liyos lachem le'elokim. Ani Hashem Elokeichem. We declare, I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is built into the very fabric, built into the very text of Kriyas Shema. What does Yetzias Mitzrayim have to do with Kriyas Shema? Why is it a part of our daily mitzvah of Shema's recitation? There could be different answers. To be sure, on one level, it may relate to Kabbalas Malchus Shamayim, the demonstration of faith that comes uniquely from Yetzias Mitzrayim. But tonight, I would suggest another answer. You want to know why Yetzias Mitzrayim is built into Kriyas Shema? Because Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is our most basic statement of who we are. Shema is not just another pasuk in the Torah. It's not just another mitzvah in the Torah. It's not just another prayer that we recite. Shema is our national anthem. It is the calling cry of Jews throughout the ages, our most basic expression of self-identity. It's the pasuk that was taught by countless Jewish mothers to their children, that was recited by countless Jewish martyrs through the ages as their souls ascended to the Shamayim. It is our most basic pledge of allegiance, our most basic statement of who we are. And when we include Yetzias Mitzrayim in that statement, we declare to Hashem, we declare to ourselves, we declare to the world that the experience of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is not a once-a-year event that we celebrate. It's something that we also carry with us and incorporate into our very identity, into our very sense of self. I urge you, over the course of the next week, over the course of the night of the Seder, and perhaps most importantly, over the course of the weeks following the Seder, find some time, and I know full well that this time of year is very difficult to come by, but find some time to take stock of the memories that make you. Take stock of all the national memories that are part of our national consciousness, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim and the saga of Jewish history, Ad Hayom Hazeh, that are a core part of all our identities. Take a moment to take stock of your personal memories, the people, the events, the experiences that have shaped who you are, who have made you into who you are today. Find time to take stock of all our experiences over the last 547 days, the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, the genus and the shavach. Spend some time with those memories. Sit with them, reconnect with them, perhaps even re-experience them. And then ask yourself, how am I going to carry them forward? If these were indeed life-changing experiences, then how is my life going to change? If they were transformative, then how will I be transformed? These are the memories that shape me, that mold me, that change me, that guide me, that motivate me. Then how will I carry them? And how will I incorporate them in my life? That is the task of the night of Sipur and Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. That is the challenge of the night of V'higadat Levincha and Zachor Es Hayom Hazeh Asher Yitzasem Mitzrayim. That is the opportunity of that majestic night of past, present, and future all combined. That is the power of the night of the Seder, the night of the memories that make us. Let me use this as an opportunity to wish everyone a wonderful Pesach. To those who will be with us here in Teaneck, I look forward to spending Yantif with you. To those who are traveling, I wish you safe travels abroad. I wish everyone a meaningful Seder, imbued with the memories that make us, with both Sipur and Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. And I wish you all a Chag Kasher Sameach.